وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. Continuing in our lessons on Usul Fiqh. Last week we discussed the issue of al-mafhum, the implicit meaning of a text and its types and categories. And this week, inshallah ta'ala, we'll move on to what's remaining of the adillah, the evidences, or the dalalat, the indications which are of alfaz, dalalatul alfaz, the indication of words. Because after that there is the indications of actions. So we'll group what's remaining today, and then we'll finish, inshallah ta'ala, next week, not next week, the week after that, on the discussion of when there's a seeming contradiction. So now that we covered most of the most important elements of the dalalatul alfaz, the indications of wordings, we're left with some of the few, and one of them is al-mujmal wal-mubayyan. Al-mujmal wal-mubayyan. Al-mujmal means something which is obscure, it's unclear in its meaning. Wal-mubayyanu is that which has been clarified or clarifies. So we know the Quran and Sunnah is clear, but sometimes something in the Quran and Sunnah, its intent or its meaning has multiple meanings. And so the way to understand this is that we said before that anytime we have a text, the text is either going to be nas or it's going to be zahir. It's going to be something, a nas, a text that carries usually one meaning, although it can be interpreted, but it has one meaning. And then zahir, two meanings, one is more apparent than the other. And then now we have mujmal. There's two meanings, neither of them is clear. So that's mujmal. Mujmal has two meanings, obscure. We don't know which way it's going. So ما دل على أحد معنيين لا مزية لأحدهما الآخر. A word that has two distinct meanings, not clear which one is intended by versus the other. So a word that has two meanings, none of them is too clear in the text here. The word can go either way. So the rule, because we're going to see that the Quran and Sunnah, anytime a word is left mujmal, obscure, in its intended meaning, because if it has two meanings, it could be A or B. But we know it can't be A and B at the exact same time. It has to mean either A or B. In that case, we need to go and find that which is mubayyan, that which is going to clarify. So what does mubayyan mean? Al-bayan, they call it clarification. Al-bayanu, or al-mubayyan, that which clarifies. Al-dalil alladhi awdah maqsood bil-mujmal, that which clarifies the obscure meaning. So if a text has more than one meaning, we're not sure which of the intended meanings is there, we must go to a text which is mubayyan, clarifying what the intended meaning is. And sometimes what's mujmal, what's obscure, is not the meaning, but it could be mujmal in kayfiyya, in howness. So to give us understanding of this, think about a mujmal as something obscure. We're not sure exactly what Allah intends. So therefore, you must go and look for a clarifying text to show this is what Allah meant here. Because by the word you're using here, it's not clear. Or we know what the word means, but we don't know how to do it. Mithal, وَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةِ. Allah says establish the prayer. This is clear that we need to establish the prayer. The amr is wadih, but the salah is mujmal, the kayfiyya, how you pray. So what do? We go to the Quran and Sunnah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about in the Quran what you're supposed to do, some of the arkan and shurut. Like in what's going to be mubayyin, sallu kama ra'aytumuni usalli. Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam pray. Wadih, that's a clear example. Another one, hajj. Allah says, وَلِلَّهِ عَلَى النَّاسِ حِجُّ الْبَيْتِ. Upon the people, for the sake of Allah, to go make hajj. How do you make hajj? خُذُوا عَنِّي مَنَاسِكَكُمْ. It's mujmal, mubayyin. Because someone says, I'm going for hajj and he does his own way, it doesn't count. Because mujmal, hajj by itself, the Quraysh do hajj the wrong way. Hajj means to strive and struggle. What is the hajj the Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam had? Well, here, he showed us. And why did he show us? That shows you again, when he said, take from me your hajj, the prayers you've seen praying. Why is he telling us this? Because the job of Rasulullah is to clarify the Sharia. That's his job, he has to clarify. So now we can understand the Quran and Sunnah are always clarifying. Whatever seems to be obscure, we have the clarification somewhere else. So it's not allowed for someone just to say the Quran and Sunnah, Allahu A'lam, what it means. There are some people out there that they want us to walk around like everything is يعني في الإجمال والله أعلم. No. It's clear, and we're going to see the principles. So once we understand that there is such thing, there are some masail principles. We'll just take the principles and then we can see how they apply. The first qaida, principle, حكم المجمل. What's the ruling on al-mujmal? Something which is obscure. حكم مجمل التوقف فيه حتى يتبين المراد منه. First principle in relation to the ruling of an obscure text, التوقف فيه. We hold back from acting on it حتى يتبين المراد منه, until we get the clarification as to what Allah means by it. The reason why something is التوقف فيه means you don't do anything until حتى يتبين المراد منه. So if something's obscure, you hold back on acting on it till it becomes clarified, because you want to know what Allah wants from us. So for example, if Allah told us أقيموا الصلاة and we don't know how to pray, or someone told you to go for Hajj and you don't know how to go for Hajj, what's your job for you? You have to go find out. But something which is mujmal as a text, you would not act upon it until you know what's intended. So you go find the clarification. And if you don't know, you ask. So that's the first principle. And why tawaqquf? Tawaqquf means holding back until it's clear, not denial. No, you can't deny the text. And also you're not going to do ta'weed the text right by yourself. You're going to tawaqquf until it becomes clear. So the good news is everything which is obscure apparently has been clarified in the Sharia. That's the good news, right? So there's no really obscure things. Everything we have clarification for deen, because deen is wadah, it's clear. Second principle. It says here الاشتراك واقع في اللغة وهو تعدد المعنى واتحاد اللفظ. Okay, we'll skip this principle now just because this is more to do with language. Some of these are principles, they come later. You don't need them now to do with language and wordings. Let's move to a second principle, easier. Very common principle. ترك الاستفصال في مقام الإجمال ينزل المنزلة العموم في المقال. It's a beautiful statement. قاعدة ترك الاستفصال, to leave off. When the Sharia, let's say there's a text in which there's some obscurity, possibly. Tarkul istifsali means to leave off clarifying something. So imagine Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, he told us something and he didn't clarify more. Tarkul istifsali, he didn't tell us the details. Fi maqam al-ijmali, in a time when there's some obscurity. Anytime there's a leaving off of explanation of the details, when there is some obscurity, ينزل المنزلة العموم في المقال, it makes the text general. Anytime Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam did not explain something in which there was some obscurity possibly, but he left explanation, indicates generality. Why? Because if it was something to be clarified, he would have, but he didn't, leaving it to the generality of the text. So the قاعدة ترك الاستفصال في مقام الإجمال ينزل المنزلة العموم في المقال. To leave off clarification in the time when there is some obscurity would make a text general in its meaning. Let's give an example so it becomes very clear. And the ulama mentions qaida again and again and again. So an example, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was, let's imagine he was asked a question. And then when he's asked this question, which has more than one possible meaning or interpretation, and then he didn't ask the questioner what he intended, and he gave us a ruling, then the ruling applies to any scenario possibly meant by that question. Because the Prophet didn't ask when he should have, if it's necessary to ask, he would ask, but he didn't. So to give you an example, Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, when someone came and asked him about, let's say, a ruling on something, or about what someone did. Let's give an example of Abu Bakr. Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, when he came and he walked in and he made the ruku' and he joined the saf and he prayed the salah. Nabi asked him after why he did that, or don't do that again, right? The hastening. Did he ask him about did you pray Fatiha or not? Did he ask him, did you Fatiha or not? He came in ruku', walking, joined the saf. Nabi didn't ask him a Fatiha. He asked him, may Allah grant you in goodness, but don't do that again. Don't do what again? One interpretation, don't make ruku' and join, another means don't rush when you're doing it. But one question, he didn't ask him, did you read Fatiha or not? ترك الاستفسار في مقام الإجمال. He left it out, left general. So it means, scholars say here that it's okay, that they counted. Second thing he didn't ask him was, did you make your takbir standing or bowing? Second mas'ala. The ulama, you know, the debate. When you're doing qiyam, you have to say Allahu Akbar. If I do takbir when I come late for salah, while going, I do takbir ihram while bowing, does it count or not? Ikhtilaf. As most of us know, when you do qiyam, then you say Allahu Akbar. The takbir ihram goes with the qiyam. But some ulama say it's not a shart. Qiyam is shart. Takbir ihram is qiyam is a rukun. Takbir ihram is a rukun. But qiyam ma'ahum laysa rukun. What's the delil? This hadith. Because here, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam saw Abu Bakr, he joined the ruku' behind them. He didn't ask him, how do you do your takbir? Did you do one standing, bowing? Because he knew he bowed. Again, he left off asking all these questions, showing his general. So some of the scholars will look at this. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, when he's asked something, he fails to explain something. It's not because he doesn't have to explain. He has to explain, but what he means is general. If the Prophet said something's allowed and it has more than one meaning, it's allowed. So this will show us, and we're going to come to later. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam's job is always to clarify if anything's wrong or anything needs clarification. If he chooses not to, what does it mean? Then either the thing is general, or a thing is not prohibited, or it's okay. Because Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is not allowed, as we'll see, to delay explanation when it's needed. So the benefit we take from this tarkul istifsal, at a time period when there's confusion about what the person is asking, and the Prophet didn't give clarification, no ask for details, that's the general text. And that shows you again that this will show us how the Prophet ﷺ and also the ulama understood some of the texts. We're going to come to that principle again, many examples of it. Another principle. Let's see here. يحصل البيان بكل ما ينفي الإجمال من قول. Okay, maybe choose another one here. بكل ما ينفي الإجمال. Okay, we'll leave that there. Let's get to this third principle. This is a very important principle. لا يجوز تأخير البيان عن وقت الحاجة. This one we hear often. It is not permissible to delay clarification at the time of need. والوقت الذي يحتاج فيه المكلف إلى البيان. That's the time that the person needs the clarification. لا يجوز تأخير البيان. It's not permissible to delay clarification. It's not permissible to delay clarification عن وقت الحاجة, from the time in which it's needed. And also it's permissible, the opposite is true, it's permissible to delay explanation until the time of need. So if it's not allowed to delay it until the time of need, it's permissible to delay it until the time of need. The opposite. Right? So you can't delay when you need it, but you can delay it until you need it. And what is the delay for that? فَإِذَا قَرَأْنَاهُ فَاتَّبِعْ قُرْآنًا. When we read to you the Quran, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when we recite the Quran, ثُمَّ إِنَّ عَلَيْنَا بَيَانًا. Then we're going to clarify it. So this ثُمَّ means what? Then tartib. So Allah says, we're going to read to you Quran Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then later we're going to clarify it. Why Allah didn't clarify the meaning of the Quran as it came down? Because وَيَجُوزُ تَأْخِيرُ الْبَيَانِ عَنْ وَقْتِ الْخِطَابِ إِلَى وَقْتِ الْحَاجَةِ. So you can delay it. ثُمَّ then tartib إِنَّ عَلَيْنَا بَيَانًا. We're going to clarify later. But let's say something happened now and someone needs the information right now. You can't delay it. So for example, something haram happened and someone asks you a question, he needs the details. You can't say, I'll tell you tomorrow. He needs it now. This is the time to ask, time to clarify, right? Another example, we'll go back to Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, same example of Bakr when he prayed. It was Waqtul Hajj, right? Because the Prophet asked him, who did that? It was him. He explained to him, Waqtul Hajj. You're supposed to explain, did you do your qiyam, takbir ihram with qiyam or ruku'? Did you read Fatiha or not? The Prophet never asked. So therefore it means it's okay. لا يجوز تأخير البيان عن وقت الحاجة. So the Prophet is not allowed to hide or to miss clarification when needed. So if we were to say that Fatiha is a shart, a condition, sorry, a pillar for the latecomer, not the one who gets to reach the first takbir. I'm talking about masbuq, latecomer to salah. People always mix the two. The one who caught the first takbir is not like the one who come late. Masbuq has different ahkam. Latecomer has different rulings. So latecomer missed Fatiha. Okay. What is it here? The issue? Did you catch the ruku' or not? Someone said, oh, Fatiha, you came late. And Abu Bakr came late and Nabi never asked him, what did you do with the Fatiha? لا يجوز تأخير عند وقت الحاجة. خلاص. So therefore it's permissible because Nabi meant taqreer, he affirmed it. See, that's why Wallahu A'lam strong views that you don't have to read Fatiha if you come late for the salah. Because look, here's the Sahaba who came late, never asked him. So that's the power of Usul al-Fiqh, because if someone says a shart, we say yes for the mudrak, let's say musbiq. Masbuq is different than the one who got the rak'ah, either for the qiyam. We're talking about someone who came late, not the one who came in the beginning. But if someone brought you a generality of the text, we say that's true, and we have now another text. What are we going to do here? So here's a benefit that Prophet ﷺ, anytime something is needed, he tells us. It's not allowed for him to delay it. So whenever you find something of a scenario where the Prophet ﷺ should have explained something but he didn't, what does he tell you then? Then something's okay, because he's not allowed to delay it. Because if something's mujman, he has to make bayan. Right, he has to make bayan. So here we can say at the end, anything which is obscure must be carried on the evidence which are clear. That's the rule. That's another rule. If something's mujman, we said you can't act on it until you find which mubayyin. But if something's mujman, obscure, just remember the Sharia is already clarified. That's the deen. The deen is all clear. The question will be that we're not just going to add, look for one over the other. We're going to find the clarifying evidences. And you can find many examples of this in the Quran and Sunnah, but it's very easy to understand how it works. And so to clarify then, what does the clarifying text look like? A text could clarify another text by clarifying it in wording or clarifying it through action. That's it. You can clarify a text through wording or through action. And the ulama, they go into explanation, what does the clarifying text look like, etc., right? It could be mutawatir hadith, ahad hadith, any evidence that we know. And the scholars didn't go further by saying you can clarify text by making restriction or specification or obligation. Again, they're going further in terms of how it works. But now you know. So if something's obscure to us, we're not going to just act on obscure text. Sharia is clear. But the problem sometimes is that if there's a difference of opinion, we must make sure that we're going to find the clarity in the evidences which are clarifying. So we talked about it before, right? The issue of takbir to ihram. Right? We said that you can't start the salah without takbir to ihram. And you have to say Allahu Akbar according to the most correct opinion. The Hanafi said you can start with any kind of praise or glorification of Allah. And we're going to say that's not correct because Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam told us وَتَحْرِيمُهَا تَكْبِير. But then we know the word takbir can be mujmal. Right? Because takbir, what does takbir mean? It means Allahu Akbar. So what are we going to do? This is mujmal maybe. Could mean takbir, could be any way to glorify Allah. وَرَبَّكَ فَكَبِّرْ. You can make takbir any way. Glorify Allah, not only Allahu Akbar, right? So how do we solve that? Well, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam is going to clarify. How did he start his salah? We're going to look for the mubayyin fil waqt. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, sallu kama ra'aytum usalli. Any salah he prayed without takbir ihram, without saying Allahu Akbar, never existed. Khalas, that's the tafsir then. So if we have clear this hadith, no problem. Prophet ﷺ's job is to clarify. Did he ever start the salah with Subhanallah, Wallahu a'zam, or never, right? So khalas, that's it. So sometimes the difference of opinion could be on the meaning of one hadith that no one knows 100% or they differed. Okay, we'll go to the mubayyin. Let's get something clear. So that one, alhamdulillah, is a little bit easier to understand. Of course, it goes into more depth in terms of how it impacts difference of opinion. But let's move now to issue of abrogation, because this is very important as well. So now that we have understood the different levels of text, there's something that we didn't talk about, which is to do with abrogation of texts, an-nasikh wal mansukh. And this is very important because once we understand how the Quran and Sunnah now can be interpreted, now we know some texts are abrogated and some are abrogating. Some are abrogated and some are abrogating. And the concept of abrogation is very important because it allows us to know how to interact with this text. But if we don't have this concept, then we're left with a lot of confusion, because someone may act upon a text which is abrogated and somebody else might try to deny its abrogation. So how does it work? The scholars, they say, when it comes to naskh, the idea of abrogation means رفع الحكم دليل الشرعي أو لفظه بخطاب جديد متراخٍ عنه. To lift, when you say something's abrogated, all it means is to lift the ruling or the wording. The ruling or the wording of a legislative evidence. To lift, when I say rafa' means remove. So to remove the wording or the ruling of a legislative text due to another text that came later than it. خلاص. So you have two texts, one came first, one came after. The one that came later is against the one that came earlier. So what do? We're just going to abrogate this one because the second text came later, the first one came earlier. And what are you abrogating? What are you removing? Hukm or lafz, the wording or ruling. So sometimes you're removing the wording, sometimes you're removing the ruling, sometimes the wording and the ruling, sometimes just the ruling, not the wording, right? So you can have that, all those scenarios. So that's abrogation is. But what's the key word? Mutarakhir anhu. The second text is the one that's abrogating has to come with a chronological order, has to come later. Because the second one came later than the other one, so it took out the first one. But if we don't know the timeline, can you do naskh? No, we're going to see there's a condition. That's one of the problems already. We can't see something abrogated. We don't know the timeline of these two texts. So one of the problems sometimes happens when people want to abrogate something, they're calling for abrogation or they're claiming abrogation, they can't prove the timeline or you can't prove the dates. So you can't do that. The benefit also, we know that abrogation is not the origin of Sharia. Abrogation is very less in the Quran and Sunnah, very less. Some ulama many ulama have written books on it. So you can check the ahadith which abrogated and the ayat which abrogated. Right? So we did it a long time ago. Some of us remember in the ulum al-Quran class, how many ayat were abrogated? About 10. Right? 10 roughly. So again, it's a big khilaf. Some say like hundreds. I know, that's not correct. Most of the Sharia is abrogated or not? It's not. And some people, they say the most of the deen is abrogated. No, this is not correct. So it's very less. And a hadith, you could say a couple of hundred or more. Right? Some limit 300, 400, depends, right? But a little more, a hadith abrogated. Sometimes, so some books too, they tell you which ones are. Again, the debate comes to authenticity. But shows us that the abrogation is way less than that which is not. Why do you think it's less? Because the deen has to remain to Yawm al-Qiyamah. If all these abrogated, khalas, we're going to do it at the end of times. We're going to have to do ijtihad. Everything's abrogated. So that's why abrogation is not much. Now, another problem that's happening today, and we don't have time to get into it, but it's a serious discussion. There are a lot of people who are anti-abrogation, who claim abrogation is against the Sharia, and they don't believe in abrogation. Right? A lot of rational modernists who come in and are trying to attack the concept of naskh. It's a serious discussion, right? Because these people, they claim abrogation goes against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's hikmah. تجهل يعني Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, why does he abrogate something? هو العليم الحكيم. Because we are da'if. He religiously something for us at one time because of our hal. Then when we get stronger, he abrogates and brings something else. So they're looking at Allah's wisdom saying, why will Allah say, well, take it back? Allah al-Alim al-Hakim, He knows us we're da'if. So for example, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala abrogates certain rulings of war or certain rulings of prayer, because when they first prayed, you could speak in prayer. Then Allah abrogated that. You can't speak in Qumullahi qaniteen, stand in front of Allah obediently. Salah, you can't talk. Inna salat shughlan, you're busy in salah, not talking to Allah. In the beginning, you could talk. Why? Because they just started praying. So Sahaba used to talk to one in the salah when the salah first was legislated in Medina, because that's the beginning of the salah. When it got easier, then it was abrogated. But some will say, why Allah did that? Allahu Alim al-Hakim, we're da'if. So He knows our hal. So they come and say it goes against wisdom. They themselves have no wisdom. Right now, a child, how do you teach him salah? As soon as you reach 7, you teach him all the ahkam. What kind of, these people are going to come and say, Allahu Alim al-Hakim, طيب, teach your child all the ahkam. You can't do it. So these people, when you actually look at the arguments, it's a serious discussion though, because they're being shubuhat, as many of their names out there. And these are the discussions that we, Ahl Sunnah, have to fight against these things, because anyone denies abrogation is also Usul al-Din. What do you mean abrogation? It's not something like the Deen has, except it came with, but these people want to come and say abrogation was invented to hide the contradiction of the Deen. How can it when it's in the Quran itself? Well, it's in the Quran, right? So they say the ulama made up abrogation to hide the Sharia. How can it? Allah said in the Quran that He abrogates. So these people, when you think about what they're doing, they're trying to say that the abrogation is a reconciliation tool. Well, what? We made it up? And so later you will see, when you study this, it must be understood to people why abrogation exists. But since we don't have too much time, we're just going to talk about how it works. Because, of course, we believe in abrogation. So now we have to look at the arkan. The arkan, the principle of abrogation, as followed. One, you need a nasikh. Right? So the nasikh is, of course, the one who's abrogating. Right? Or that which is abrogating. Wal mansukh. So nasikh is right. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who's legislating the abrogation. والمنسوخ, right? That which is being abrogated, or that which is being abrogated, which is the rulings or the statements. So the nasikh wal mansukh. So that with text which is abrogating, revealed by Allah, and the mansukh, that which is being abrogated, and then you have that which is being used to abrogate. So another text to abrogate. So Allah, to make it easy, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who said one speech or one ruling, then Allah again brings another text to abrogate the other text he came with. That's it. So essentially you have one thing abrogating, another thing which is abrogated, and the way it's being abrogated, and how it's being conveyed to us. So at the end of the day, where we're going to find abrogation? In the Quran wa Sunnah. Or the Sahaba are going to say it. So scholars say all you have to know is that you have to have what's being abrogated, what is used to be abrogated, the timeline for the abrogation, and what is being a ruling or a wording. So the principles then to make sure that we understand how it's going to be done is a very important part, which is the timeline. So both texts are legislative. So ayah, hadith, right? Or you have any other evidences we're going to use here. But the main thing is the nasikh, the one that's abrogating, mutaakhiran, it has to come later. That's the key condition. The abrogating text must be later than the one that came before. It must be later. Otherwise, what's going to happen here? We can't abrogate, because if they both came at the same time, why are you abrogating? They're going to just go with them together. The other one has to come after. And, as we'll see here, since it's coming after, it's going to abrogate the one that came before it. And it doesn't have to be a stronger evidence. Some people say Quran can only be abrogated by Quran. Sunnah can't abrogate. No, doesn't matter. And also, the problem people have is that when you're talking about abrogation, what about the concept of contradiction? It's not contradictory, right? Because contradiction is what? When you have nafsul waqt, nafsul an. We're talking one came after, one came before. So some of them, they come and say abrogation is contradictory. How? The Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, for example, they used to allow the ruling before you can make wudu, you have to make wudu with if you eat anything that's cooked in fire. And later, you don't have to make wudu with everything that's touched by fire. So that's the ruling we have now. If you eat something that's barbecued or cooked, you don't have to make wudu. And before, you used to make wudu. Is that abrogation? Yes. Is it contradiction? It would only be contradiction. The Prophet said in the same time, make wudu for that which touches fire, and don't make wudu that which touches fire. So these people today who have a problem with abrogation, they don't even know what tanaqud, contradiction is. But if today I told you, don't go outside, and I came to you the next day and said, go outside, it's 2 different days. So sometimes you hold your head when you look at some of these people, they don't even know the shurut, and what they're doing, they're always trying to make a big confusion. So we know, mutaakhiran, the key word, it came later. Now someone will say, how do you know a text came later? That's the part where it gets tricky. Because you have to prove it, you can't claim it. You can't say this one's abrogated, this one. No, where's the proof? So a lot of claims are made, right, on this abrogated text. Easy to say this, right? Who said it? Where is it? So now the ulama say, if you know this, you have to find that it's abrogated. How do you know it's abrogated? Either the wording will say, this one came later, or ijma' ulama, or the sahabi told us. So very important. How do you know something abrogated? The hadith would say that. The Prophet might say, I abrogated this. How about visiting the graves? What the Prophet would say? I used to prohibit you from visiting the graves. Now what? Now go. Right? So clearly it's abrogated. He's telling you, go now. Zuru, visit the graves. He told, I used to prohibit you. Kuntu nahitukum. And now it's okay. That's clear abrogation. Another one, ijma' ulama wal ummah. This text has been abrogated. A third one, a sahabi will say it. We used to do this, but now it's abrogated. Clear. So once something becomes abrogated, we don't act upon it anymore. We don't act upon it anymore, yes, because it's abrogated. But before it was abrogated, we're allowed to act upon it. Means before the Sahaba, when they reached them, that it became abrogated, they used to act upon it. So the simple point we're also going to see, abrogation has to do with actions, not reports. There's no abrogation for akhbar. Alright, so Allah is not going to say there's Jannah, no, there's no more Jannah. النسخ في الأعمال والأفعال لا في الأخبار. So there's no abrogation when it comes to word for statements and akhbar. Otherwise it's kiddie, right? Right? So Allah told us the Jannah, then he said, actually, there's no Jannah. What's going on here? There's no khabar, there's no naskh. Naskh is to do a'mal. Right? Do, don't do. Halal, haram, mustahab, makruh, like that. So that's important because some people, again, not understanding the nature of the naskh, they may, again, assume things which are not correct. So the benefit behind abrogation, obviously, as we said, is to do with it's allowing us to know which part of the Sharia is still to be acted upon, which is no longer. And when there's a dispute, we must go back to the evidences from the Quran and Sunnah. It's not allowed, right, for someone to claim abrogation. Sometimes, again, the ulama will differ because of this, but now we understand generally that some of different opinion may return to that. The good news then is that since the Sharia is mostly not abrogated, the claim for abrogation must be proven with dalil, right? Otherwise, we can't take it. And we must have evidence and showing that which will come later. Sometimes we don't know, so we differ. If we could try to find an evidence that one of them came later than the other. An example I already gave before was a discussion about the issue of the masah on the khuf and the cutting below the ankles or not, and the discussion about the hadith, about the hajj. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said one thing, and later on the hajj said something else. So some said the hajj with that abrogated it. Right? Another example would say is that, let's give the example of the camel meat. That's a simple one. Right? All the madhahib except the Hanabila say camel meat breaks wudu. Only the Hanbali say that. All the madhahib say camel meat doesn't break the wudu. What's the argument? That the hadith about the abrogation, which is established, and we all agree that eating something cooked is abrogated. Doesn't break the wudu. Eating what's cooked doesn't break the wudu. That's agreed because the hadith is abrogated. But what they differ then is, does the camel meat fall into the abrogation or not? So first we know, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam used to say, anytime you eat something with cooked in meat, you have to make wudu. And then the hadith comes later, says the Prophet prohibited that or he abrogated, sorry. So we agreed now. Where is difference now? Is camel meat cooked? Yes, so it falls into abrogation. That's the 3 out of 4 madhabs. The Hanbalis say no because you have a separate text that says, when the Sahabi asked Rasulullah, if we eat camel meat, should we make wudu? And he said, yes. So that's a separate hadith. He knows about the hadith, right? So why, when he said yes, why didn't he say, wait, it's cooked with fire? That's okay too? So who has a stronger proof here? The Hanabila. They're more correct. But now you understand, because what the other 3 methods are saying? They're saying, yes, camel meat used to break wudu because it used to be cooked too. It's going to abrogation. So we can see here the abrogation sometimes can be a source of difference of opinion. Is something abrogated or not? Another time you may notice also that if we don't know if something's abrogated or not, we may differ. And we may have to resort to finding out the dates. Another example, touching the private parts, break wudu or not. Now, the trouble here is there's so many different opinions on that, right? Does it break wudu or not? We're not going to go into all of it. But where is discussion coming from? How many hadith on the topic? There's 2. Anyone knows the 2 hadith? Touching the private parts, 2. So it surrounds 2 hadith. Yeah, so one says it's part of you, and the one says it breaks the wudu. So hadith of Busra and hadith of Tariq ibn Ali. Am I correct? These 2 hadith. So which one comes after which? This is the debate. Some say abrogated, we're going to abrogate one over the other. Some they say jama', some say tarjih. So we're going to see later, whenever we have this, so the conversation is, one hadith says, if you touch your private parts, it breaks the wudu. The other hadith says, just part of you, it doesn't break the wudu. So now we have seemingly contradictory texts. Next week, or the week after, we're going to talk about what do you do with these 2. So one of the ways that some scholars try to solve it, they abrogated the one over the other. They said Sheikh Busra came later, so it abrogates the one that came earlier. Now that's one of the ways to deal with it. But we're going to see next week, whenever you have a hadith or ayat and seemingly contradictory, you have 3 ways to solve them. Jama', nasakh, wa tarjih. You have 3 ways. You combine evidences, abrogate one of the evidences, or choose one over the other. Right? So we're going to see these are the tools for tarjih. So some say nasakh. One Sahabi came to Islam later, another one khalas, nasakh. The other one's mansukh. It sounds correct, right? But then we have problem, right? Where's the proof for that? Right? Yes, she came later in Islam, but we can't prove that's a tariq. You have no date. You have so see how complicated it gets. Someone say, well, she came to Islam later. Yes, some Sahabi, sometimes we use that. Look at the narrator's age. For example, the Sahabi who came late to Islam, right? You're going to look at his situation, didn't come late earlier. Another example, Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, when he talked about how to pray salah, most of the narration about salah comes in Medina. Then there's the one hadith we know, Sallu kama ra'aytum nusalli. There's hadith Malik bin Huwayrith. Malik bin Huwayrith came much later, and he's the one who narrated the description of the Prophet, and he's the one narrated his prayers seen him praying, and he has different wordings of praying than everybody else's. He's the one who has all the ziyadat of where to raise your hand and jalsa istiraha. It's all his hadith. So what are we going to do here? See, some people say, no, this one is contradictory to all the hadith. And we're not going to, but then someone's going to say, but he came later. Right? And all these kind of discussions. So you're going to see later, sometimes the problem that comes is it's not easy to just dismiss a hadith. You can't. So naskh, abrogation, is a powerful tool in its right place. You can't just jump to it, right? It's easier said than done, right? Just comes, abrogated. No. You have to establish your case. Sometimes we'll do it because it's easier, which one came later, khalas, we just get rid of the text. But it's a qa'idah also. Right? إِعْمَالُ النُّصُوص أَوْلَى مِنْ إِهْمَالِهِ. That's a qa'idah. Acting upon the evidences takes precedence over neglecting any one of them. If there's an option to act on both, we don't just reject one over the other. Some of us, that's how we do it, right? Someone tells you something you don't know, you just mean tarjih. ليش؟ يعني هو ترجيح really. والجمع أولى من ترجيح, but we know how we are. We don't know any better, so جمع. No, tarjih. This is wrong. Because most of us, what do we do? If someone told you something you don't know, he has a hadith, it's probably, that one's not the strongest. The reason why we're doing it is because we don't know how to solve it. That's not right. You have to act on both evidences, more deserving than to choose one over the other. We're going to see next time. إِعْمَالُ النُّصُوص أَوْلَى مِنْ إِهْمَالِهِ. To act upon evidence is more deserving to reject one over the other. And the reason why it's important is because if someone told you something and I have another view, if I can harmonize them, that's the best. Harmonization is the proof of Islam, brothers. One of the ways to show Islam is true, you can harmonize many things. And look at Shaykh Ibn Taymiyyah. He showed so many ways to harmonize so many things. That's the beauty of a deen. So we're going to see the week after how to, when we get these kinds of interesting discussions. But one thing we don't want to be doing, we keep claiming abrogation. Don't do that, right? That's not knowledge, right? Just going to say abrogated, right? You're going to meet the proof then. Let's talk about Usul actions now. And we'll finish with this. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, we talked about all about the wordings, how to deal with wordings. The last dalalat, indications available, are fi'liyah. And this is where it gets interesting, but not as complicated as the last one. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam's words have more implications than his actions. That's the good news. The Prophet, he said something, it has more than one way to interpret it, restricted or general, or unrestricted, specific or general. Is it nas, one meaning, two meaning, mujmal, mubayyan. So one word has so many interpretations. When it comes to fi'l now, scholars, they say Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam's actions, the way in which we deal with them, this has to do with the sunnah, because Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam's actions we're talking about. The origin, asl, al-asl, في أفعال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أنه يصح الاقتداء به فيها. The origin, the Prophet ﷺ, anything he does, the origin, you have to follow him. The origin, the Prophet's actions are to be followed. Anytime someone told you Rasulullah did something, al-asl is iqtida, follow him. And that when he's doing something, he's not just doing it for himself. This is for everybody. You have to follow him. وَمَا أَتَاكُمْ رَسُولُ فَخُذُوهُ. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ. He's our role model. You have to follow him. We're also going to see that if the Prophet did something, even if you're not sure what the full meaning is, the origin is act upon it. At-ta'assi means to take him as a role model, which means to take the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam's actions as he did it. Right? So that's the rule. As he did it, you do it. And when we don't know, before we go there, when we know the ruling of what he did, we do it the way he did it. If he did something wajib, it's wajib. If he did something mustahab, it's mustahab. Likewise, something makruh, he doesn't do makruh unless he's going to show us that it's something permissible. And Nabi doesn't do things haram, right? Right. So if he does, let's say he does something which is wajib, for us to do it is wajib. Something he did sunnah, we do it as sunnah. Something which is disliked. Sometimes Rasul will do something that he told not to do it to show that it's just disliked, not haram, to clarify, like bayan, right? An example. What is about that hadith? The Prophet said not to face the qibla when you're urinating, right? The hadith of Umar, he said that I saw the Prophet facing his back, right, towards, right, away from the qibla, and there's a barrier between him. So why did he do that? Some say to show us that it's allowed, right? Even though they don't do it, so it's makruh versus haram. Like that. Sometimes we'll do something to show you what the ruling is. But generally, whatever the Prophet did, you do it. If you pray 2 rak'ah before Fajr, Sunnah, you do it, Sunnah. If you say 2 rak'ah Fajr, Fard, Fard. So now, what about if I don't know the ruling of the Prophet's action? Is it wajib, Sunnah? What should I do? Scholars say if you don't know what the Prophet intended by an action, you don't know what was the intent behind it, the very least we should know is that if he did it and we don't know what he intended by it, and this action is a legislative action, it appears to be religious. So it's not talking about the Prophet ate, what he wore, it's talking about what he did. So let's give an example. The Prophet ﷺ, one day he prayed 2 rak'ah in the house of Hani after the Fath al-Makkah. Okay, we're going to come to that in a second. Nabi ﷺ did this. So now he's praying. Praying was what kind of worship? Praying is worship, right? So now, we don't know what he was praying exactly, but we know it's one of two choices. It's either mustahab or wajib. How do you know this? The Prophet did an act of worship. It's only one of those two. Now, another example, the Prophet ate honey. Now, that's not ibadah, is it? So what is it going to be? Going to be mubah, permissible. So we're going to see, when I'm talking about worship now, imagine the Prophet did an act of worship. You have two choices. It's either mustahab or wajib. We're going to find out. But our job is, if you heard the Prophet did something of ibadah, you're allowed to do it. Okay? Because some people will say, no, you can't do it, akhi. This is for only him. Wait. You can't make that case unless you have proof. When you see and you heard the Prophet did something of worship, it's only two choices. Let's come to the scenario. Nabi Sallallahu entered the house of Hani, he prayed 8 rak'ah after the Fath al-Makkah. What is that salah? Scenario number 1, Salat Duha. Scenario number 2, Salatul Fath. In Sham, recently when the army came into Syria and liberated, they prayed Salatul Fath. 8 rak'ahs. Some people say, what in the world is that? Some people never heard that. That one interpretation, Jumhur Ahlul Ilm, some say it's more correct view, is what he did in Hani's house. Fath al-Makkah, he did Salatul Fath, 8 rak'ahs, Sunnah. And some of us never heard that, right? But the 8 rak'ahs was, the scholars differed. Was it duha? The Prophet didn't usually pray duha. But they said it must not be duha because he did 8 rak'ahs, usually does 2. And some 4. What's this 8? So here's the ikhtilaf. I know it's interesting, you can research it. Well, the benefit is what? Whatever it is, duha or fath, it's mustahab or wajib. That's all, at least I know that. I can do it. But now if you call it fath, it's different. If you say duha, it's duha, right? So that's the beauty of knowing it. But no one's going to come and say, this is you're not allowed to do it. The Prophet did it, right? That's not a discussion now. But what happens when the Prophet did something, he never tried to get closer to Allah by it? An action called an action of nature. We call al-jibilli, the Prophet's natural indications or natural habits. Fi'lul jibilli. Fi'lul jibilli means a natural action the Prophet loved. He loves cold water with honey. Is that ibadah? It's jibilli, his preference. You may not like that. So if you like it, mashallah, but it's not going to be the sunnah. Why? Why is it not sunnah? Why? Who can explain that? Why is it not sunnah? The Prophet drank water, cold water, honey. Bukhari. Why is it not sunnah by itself? The Prophet never came close to Allah by it in the qurbah. But if you did it with the intention to love him and to follow him, now you get hasanat. That's a benefit we take because you're loving him. That's an ibadah. Another example, the Prophet had long hair. Now, is there any hadith that says growing long hair is sunnah? You see, sometimes we get caught in that one. What kind of sunnah is that for us? Sunnah, fi'l, and it goes to aada. The Prophet's custom, the urf of the people was long hair. Today, the mashayikh are mostly bald. In the time of Ibn Abdul Barr, he mentioned that. That's what happened. But time is set up, they weren't bald because Khawarij were doing that. But now the Khawarij got long hair, what are you going to do? You see, some of us still long hair. It's 20, now it's 40, 46. That's not how we do it. Right? See, some of us the old way. Now the simat is the other way around. Yeah, you notice that. Actually, some ulama mentioned that's important. The Khawarij at that time were bald. Simat and tahliq, that time, not now, our time. So some people now are going to come and say, I'm not saying it's going to become a Khawarij, I'm just saying you have to understand the reason why some ulama, they don't do that. But also another way to look at it. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam sunnah fi'liya and sunnah qawliya. What did he tell Wa'il al-Hujr? Long hair, the Prophet told him what? To cut it. Hadith Abu Dawud, authentic hadith, Nabi saw him with very long hair, he told him some words, and Wa'il al-Hujr went, they cut it all off. The Prophet said, I never told you to do that, lakin hada ahsan, this is better. Now we have an issue. Sunnah qawliya or sunnah fi'liya, where's the sunnah at? Sunnah fi'liya aqwa min sunnah qawliya aqwa min sunnah fi'liya. That's what Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, that's a sunnah. Shorten your hair. I know some of us, the Usul of Fiqh, it's important, right, brothers? Right? See, some of us who were fighting with parents, so something's not even sunnah. Some of us want to go back in time now. Astaghfirullah. Now we're going to say, okay, we gotta, because again, right? That's another thing too. But not to say you can grow it, but remember the intention. What's the qasd? Why are you growing your hair long? To be like Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that's ibadah. But you're just growing along saying sunnah qurbah. It's not sunnah qurbah. It's not sunnah by way of coming near to Allah by itself. The benefit behind this, if you know an action the Prophet's worship, do it. If it's an action of habit, you have the intention, you get the ruling. If we're not sure if it's tashri' or jibilli, I'm not sure if it's worship or if it's custom, what do? Some scholars say what's apparent from this is that it's permissible at the very least, or we should carry it to be legislative if we can't. So some say what's clear is that it's at least permissible. So example, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his food, his habit, the sleep that he did, whatever he did, if it's not sure if this was the ibadah way of doing it or just his own natural way, and that's why sometimes scholars debate the sunnah by looking at the details, what's the intent, and you see how it gets a little bit complicated. But the simple example for us, which we're going to look at now, some quick examples, let's look at some ibadat and some discussions where it becomes easier to see what the Prophet ﷺ did. Was it worship or not? We mentioned this discussion before, we'll return to it. So the benefit, Nabi Sallallahu action should be followed. That's the origin. If it does the act of worship, you should do it as well. It is mustahab or it's wajib. If it's an action of custom, then it's mubah, permissible. If it's not clear, then at the very least it's mubah. But some say that if we can figure out if it's worship, it's worship. If not, we leave it to just his natural way. But we can't just say you can't follow it. When unclear, go with the asl. Another thing we're also going to see, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, when he does something, it's for the whole ummah. That's the last one. When he does something, it's for the whole ummah. When is it only for him? When he clarifies to us. So example, the Prophet used to fast from sun up all the way to the next, right, Fajr. We saw it the whole night. Are we allowed to do that? No, because he said, I'm not like you, right? Allah feeds, give me water and food and drink. That shows you it's khas, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So what we call the special qualities of the Prophet, khasa'is Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. There's a whole chapter on that. So the benefit we take, some things the Prophet has to do, we don't have to do. Something he's only allowed to do. Prophet, how many wives did he have? 9 up to 11. And how many we can have max? 4. That's it. Someone can come to us and say, I'm following Sunnah Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. There are some people like that. I'll tell them, Shaykh, what Sunnah is this? The only qawl we can find, the Khawarij who said that. Because they added Mathna wa Thalath wa Ruba', they put it together, they got 9. La hawla wa quwwata billah. They read that. The only group that said this. That's why I told them, they don't understand anything in the Quran. They read the Quran, what are you doing? Allah says, Surah Ahzab, only for you, Rasulullah. These guys are doing some next math, right? So you have to understand this. There's some people out there, I have to explain, this is dangerous. But that's the khas Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Some may come and say, why the Prophet has so many wives? Well, first of all, special for him. But secondly, when something Allah gives him special, he also has other responsibilities. Don't remember, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam doesn't only get, he also has to do. He has to pay half tonight or third. That was for him. And later we know Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam did other ibadat khas for him. So with ibadah comes also responsibility, comes benefits. That's the scholars say. He has responsibility and extra privileges, not just responsibility, benefits only. So like the Prophet has some things he has to do, we don't have to. Allah gave him some things he didn't give us. Simple. But the benefit we take, and no one's going to say this is sunnah for us. So, but the rule is, if you don't know, the origin is for the whole ummah. Let's look at one example, right, of the fi'al Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and its meaning. And the issue of salat, of the jalasul istiraha, we spoke about it before, we come back to again. Jalasul istiraha, the sitting of rest after the first and third rak'ah in the salah. What is the ruling on that? Scholars, they differed. And the two views that they hold, with jumhur ulama, you could say, inside, so they say it's not recommended or not legislated to do jalasul istiraha. Means after first rak'ah, you sit a little bit, and then you get up. And the third rak'ah, same thing. So most madhabs, they say no, it's not legislated. Shafi'i's madhab, he said sunnah, and Ibn Qudama went in the middle and said, for those who need to do it, do it. Those who don't need to do it, don't do it. Now, we look at these three views. Most of us, we do just Salaha, Sifat Salah al-Bani. We read it, we saw that there. So where is the conversation? The conversation is Malik bin al-Huwayrith, he saw the Prophet do this. So Malik, again, he came later, right? He saw the Prophet one day praying. He showed him how to pray. And he told them, this is the Salah, Sallu kama ra'aytum usalli, pray as you see him praying, go back and teach your family and your tribe. So he went back. So what did he see? He saw the Jalsa Istiraha. All the other Sahaba who narrated never saw it. Ali, Ibn Umar, Ibn Umar, we know Sahib al-Sunnah, but he narrated the Hadith al-Salah, Abu Hamid al-Sa'idi, Abdullah ibn Zubair, all the Hadith, civil Salah, they don't mention except for his. So now that raised the question for the other madhabs. How come the Sahaba who were in Medina, day and night and day, didn't see it? And Malik ibn Huwayrith, one day he saw it. So what is the hadith? Malik ibn Huwayrith said, I came to Rasulullah when he was older and he was heavier. He's an older man. So that time he did it. Hence, he must have done it because he was older. That explains why he never did it when he was younger. That's the explanation. So the three of the four madhabs, they say, you don't do it because this hadith contradicts other hadith. So therefore, who has a stronger argument? They're going to say it's the Sahabi who saw him every day. Now Ibn Qudama comes in the middle and says, well, the hadith Malik ibn Huwayrith in Bukhari as well, it's authentic. So what are we going to do with this hadith? We're going to say, well, if the Prophet did it, and he was older, he must have done it because he was older and he was tired. He did more. He stood for a long time, he had to rest. Hence, istiraha. But when the Prophet was younger, he never did it, so only old people should do it, or those who got tired. That's a good view. Right? Some ulama will take that view. But Shafi'i, what is his view? It's Sunnah. Who can explain Shafi'i's view? He says Sunnah. Sunnah do it. How does Shafi'i deal with this? Anyone else? Because we do it, right? Many of us. So, okay, so how do you prove this? Shafi'i said Sunnah. What was his argument? فعل النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. What's the أصل فعل النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم? اتباع وتأسي. You have to follow him. And is this قربة? Is this عبادة? الأصل في الأفعال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم in matters of تشريع is تشريع أصل. خلاص. صلوا كما رأيتموني أصلي. So he argued, Shafi'i, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam did it. The origin of all prophetic actions are, when it comes to worship, recommended. Hence it's recommended. Number two, he said to Malik ibn Huwayrith, صلوا كما رأيتموني أصلي. He told him to go back and teach the people. Number three, and let's add another principle here. لا يجوز تأخير بيان وقت حاجة. He's going back to his family to teach them. Right? So imagine that it was not part of the sunnah. He would have said, and Malik, don't do this one and this one. He never said it. Khalas. And we have another principle. Right? It has to do with Malik ibn Huwayrith arguing in affirmation. Ibn Umar and others, they didn't argue by way of negation. They didn't mention it. So we're going to say the one who's affirming takes precedence over the one who's negating. Al-Muthbitu yuqaddim ala nafi. The one who makes affirmation has more knowledge than the one who's negating. Even if we didn't argue with any of this, what do we have? Conclusion. What's today's subject? What's the Prophet's origin ruling when he does something in worship? Following. And then he made confirmation with saying, follow the pray me. Khalas. That's qawl sahih. Wallahu a'lam. Qawl sahih is Jalsa Istiraha is stronger view. Why? Because the Prophet did it. And the origin is his action to shari'i. And number two, he told us to follow him, and that's part of following him. So again, if you see someone doesn't do it, you know what view he's on. Someone who's old, you see him doing it, and then where Al-Albani got it from? Shafi'i's view. For example, you know, when they think Sheikh Abad is writing things. Sheikh Abad is faqih, muhaddith, he knows. But that's why now we can appreciate the discussion. Because if someone told you, I don't think it's sunnah, now you're like, oh, I know where the discussion is. We're talking about Prophet's action. Because some of us are confused. It's a Hadith Bukhari, brother. We've got to move away from that, brother. So say, no one debated that, right? What debating is what's the meaning. Because if we just say the Hadith is authentic, yes, what we have to do now, we have to do some kind of understanding of why another group will not take it. So now we know why they didn't take it. Now we know why we might take it. And now we know why Ibn Qudama was fair and he went in the middle. Because Ibn Qudama looked at the reasoning. That's a fair view, right? It's okay, the old versus young. Going back to what I said last time, you try to combine evidence is safer than trying to make tarjih. Let's look at another action, and inshallah we'll finish with that. Let's see here. Let's get an easy one here. Let's see. Okay, I'm just going to pick another one here. I'm just looking at some of the misal here. خلاص يعني we'll end with this much because some of them require more time to explain. Inshallah ta'ala, that's the end of the af'al Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So there are some differences of opinion. on these discussions. Maybe next time we'll go into them. So what we'll conclude with this chapter, the actions of the Prophet ﷺ, now we understand how it works. Another further furu'i thing that comes out of this subsidiary discussion, once we said the Prophet ﷺ's actions and the act of worship are either wajib or mustahab, right? If it's worship, and if it's not worship, it's going to be mubah. We have then a further discussion when the scholars say, okay, sure, the Prophet did something of action. Is it wajib or mustahab? That's another discussion. So sometimes you have everyone agreeing the Prophet does something, ibadah is considered something to follow. But what is he doing? Is it fard or is it wajib? Examples would be, what's the hukum on udhiyah? What's the ruling on iqamat as-salah? What's the ruling on these actions? So sometimes we say, well, the Prophet did it. Okay, it's wajib, mustahab. That's the kind of discussion. But we all agree that first step, adhan and iqamah is ibadah. The Prophet ﷺ told us about it. He also showed us how to do it. Then we go from there to see what is it he showed us. So the benefit behind the actions have less debate. Most of the debates, اختلافات in Usul al-Fiqh or فروع al-Fiqh, the fiqh issues in real fiqh, are due to the statements of the Prophet ﷺ and the statements in the Quran. So that's one thing you're going to benefit. If you look at the af'al, the difference of opinion regarding actions is less than the difference of opinion in the Prophet's wordings or than Allah's wordings. Why? Because the wordings have more ways to interpret, whereas actions have less ways. So for example, when you have a text which is a wording, we already saw how many ways you can break it down. If it's an action, we have a little bit less ways to break it down. So it makes it a little bit easier to interpret those. We also can see that, as we'll see after in the final class, when there is a seemingly contradiction, which is what most of the masail al-fiqhiyya end up in some kind of ikhtilaf and some kind of choosing of an opinion, right? This methodology of how to deal with seemingly contradictory, the word seemingly, not contradictory, because there's no such thing as contradictory text, seemingly contradictory text, how you deal with them, we're going to learn those principles and how the scholars, they have different rulings depending on how they solved it of one of the three methods. This will allow us also to appreciate the process of conclusion, even if you don't agree with the conclusion. Because to understand fiqh is not, I have the same view as you. Your methodology you took was usuli or fiqh. That was the proper way of dealing with it. But we could have different opinions. Inshallah, I don't have any quick questions. I will take yes. Can a hadith abrogate Quran? Yes. Many of the hadith abrogate the Quran because they're both min Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So therefore we have, for example, in the Quran, we have certain rulings. For example, we know how the Prophet did the rajam or the hukum for the zani or zaniya, and the one who was married wasn't sunnah. And the Quran just talks about, right? What's it called? Doing the jild, by just lashing them. What about the stoning? What about sending out for a year? So we have clarification there, but also we have the abrogations in there as well. So most of the time, the hadith is abrogating what's in the Quran, and the Quran can abrogate the hadith. It's more of the hadith because the job of the Prophet ﷺ is to clarify, and Allah revealed to him through the Sunnah to clarify what's in the Quran. Hence, we don't say that the Quran cannot be abrogated except by something stronger. This is a mistake that you find some of the madahib, they hold that it has to be equal strength. So they say Quran, Sunnah, Ijma' Qiyas. So we can't go, no, we say Quran with Sunnah have same weight. Yes, the Quran is the kalam of Allah, but it comes down with Sunnah is from Allah. So that's the correct view. Wallahu a'lam. Yes. Good. The Prophet ﷺ said going around tawaf in the camel. So was that qurba or was that was a hajjah or what? It was a hajjah because he said خُذُوا عَنِّي مَنَاسِكَكُمْ. So in order for him to see him, yeah. Otherwise, if we all come with our cars, we khalas yani. Right, so one guy actually tried to come haram with a car. He got stuck in the door, and he got arrested, of course. Right, but we don't know what he was trying to do. But someone has stopped him before he even came. Is this sunnah? Come with the car, But the idea is we can see the hajj, and that's why sometimes scholars will take a look at what was the intent behind the action. You see, this is why some of the debates can get really deep because you have to go all the way down to the action and the intent. An example: Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he did certain things when he passed by certain places for hajj. So we talked about in Umdat al-Fiqh, the Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he passed for hajj, he passed by certain places in Mecca, this valley, that valley. We know he used to come one part and go to the other part, but some parts he stopped to do certain things. Was that the sunnah or was that wifaqan? Just hap chance he stopped there. These are the conversations scholars they go into. Because Ibn Umar, the way he understood it, the Prophet did it, you do it. So he used to follow step by step, but some scholars say that's not always correct because the Prophet ﷺ did some things because it happened to be available, not that he intended exactly that. Right? So that'll be another conversation, yes. So the Sahaba, if they do something, can we imitate them by way of drawing near to Allah? Yes. Because the Sahaba, they are also to follow. وَاتَّبِعْ سَبِيلَ مَنْ أَنَابَ إِلَيَّ. That's the Sahaba. We follow those who repent often to Allah. So we have to follow Manhaj Salaf, the Sahaba. But as long as their actions don't contradict the Quran and Sunnah, and that they did ijtihad, not knowing a text was available. So for example, a Sahabi like a Bilal, we did 2 rakahs after every wudu. The Prophet confirmed this because he said, I saw you heard the footsteps in Jannah, showing that something good. And later, a hadith also mentioned about the 2 rakahs of wudu. So qawliyan, fi'liyan, and qawl sahaba. So that's where you can you cover 3 bases. But what happens when some Sahaba did something, a Sahabi, he didn't know maybe a hadith. What do we do then? Then in that case, we said already, if it goes against the Quran and Sunnah, because he did ijtihad, or another Sahabi opposed him, then that time Quran and Sunnah is hujjah, and whoever is closer to it. So that shows you sometimes some Sahaba did ijtihad, but we have nas, we have to go, right? So we have no ijtihad imam nas. Right? So that's why sometimes you can understand with their excuse. Ibn Taymiyyah mentions many examples how the Sahaba did something with their excuse because they did ijtihad without knowing there was an available text, or they understood the text differently. Right? So that's the beauty of our deen. Yes, yes. So that's the thing. When it comes to actions Rasul did as a habitual action, an aada, or urf, and we have a aada, and we have in a country a urf or aada that is different, then we obviously look at the Rasul following him in something. If you're following to love him, to follow him, you get rewarded. But if it's against the urf and aada you're doing, then you have to take into consideration the aada urf you're in, for that's what he considered as well. So scholars then say there's some things which are aada, and some things are actually ibadah, and some things are amal sahaba and salaf. So an example would be in our culture, we don't wear turbans here. Muslims cover their head in Muslim countries, but some cultures wear qutura, or you wear shamab, or you wear the turban. So where you are, you cover your head the way they covered. Where Nabi Sallam covered his head in different ways, and every culture has their way. For covering the head is the amal of Sahaba Salaf and Rasul Sallallahu, not what you covered with. But then scholars went further and said, well, we live in like places where we don't cover the head, like in the Western world. So some scholars then debated, in the West, do you cover your head or not? Shatibi writes that when he lived in Andalus, the Andalus people don't cover their head. So that was their aada. And there again, Spain, you can say, is the western part of the Muslim world. So some of the scholars say in that case you don't, but some say no, the Sahaba they did, and it was the amal Muslimin umuman, of all across. And it was only really removed the more we draw nearer to the non-Muslim, and those who were closer kind of left it. So the consideration at the end of the day, in countries like this, you act upon the amal of Sahaba and Salaf Islam generally. But if it's a aada and it's not really something of the action of Sahaba Rasulullah, but more of a custom, and our custom is different, then giving way to the custom as long as the haram is okay. But if it's something which is part of the signs of Islam, like for example, people talk about the qamis. Qamis is not aada only. So we have aqwal, and amal of Sahaba shows something good. So preference to preserving the identity of Islam takes precedence. But some things which are just a custom purely of the time of the Arab, or in that time now ours, we can change it, yes, based on that's why we say al-adad muhakkama. We believe that. So that's why it's important to understand the customs, how valuable. It's a huge chapter in fiqh, Usul fiqh as well, in fiqh, how and when do you apply these. The problem though is that the tashabbuh kuffar only happens when we imitate them something which is haram, that which is khas, specific to them. Right? So now, so if someone were to see you, they think you're a kafir. Right? That's what's intended, not something everyone is doing it. Right? So that's the benefit. Because again, sometimes people go too far in this topic. They don't know the dabit or the rule for what's tashabbuh. So I think anything Western people do is not like that. So that's why these kinds of issues, though, we have to remember one thing. Scholars say in the Western world, us preserving identities is a part of our responsibilities. The same with the non-Muslim, he dresses the way he dresses wherever he goes. So we notice that, right? They wear their clothes, and us we can also. So that's a good thing. But if someone didn't, or someone did something, we understand as to where that's coming from. And that's why when you go deeper in the conversation, you start seeing which is allowed, which is not allowed, etc. Wallahu a'lam. Yes. Yes, Sunnah Aad Sunnah Jibiliyah has to do with the Prophet's own actions and the Prophet's natural inclination. So Aad is what his customers, people did, Jibiliyah what he personally liked to do. So something that he liked versus what his people used to do. So long hair was what his people used to do. Honey, it was what he liked. So, but then they have the same ruling at the end, that's mubah. That's what it teaches us. Because the Prophet doesn't do something which is haram. But that also teaches us that the Prophet didn't like something or like something. You liking, not liking it preference-wise won't make you sinner or someone who's against the sunnah, because it goes back to that. But loving it, the Sahaba, they had complete love for Rasul. Whatever he loved, they love. Muslim, Qissa Abu Ayyub Ansari, and Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, when he was living with him, Abu Ayyub was hosting him. When he brought him the dish that had an onion, garlic, leeks, etc., Nabi Sallallahu didn't eat it, because Nabi Sallallahu said, I speak to the one you don't speak to, which is the Malaika. So he said, Abu Ayyub, I love what you don't. I don't like what you don't like, Rasulullah. I'm not gonna eat it there. That's the Sahaba, how they loved them. Anas, he said, when I saw the Prophet eat squash or pumpkin that day, if not day, I loved to eat it. I had no gathering except I brought it. So that's the higher level. What we're saying now, let's say someone doesn't like the taste. No, khilaf sunnah. No, it's not. Sometimes, we have to understand what's intended by it. So this is beneficial, because you may notice a lot of the conversation debates are things like this. Growing the hair, doing this. So we have to be careful, which is, what is the sunnah first? بارك الله فيكم. سبحانك بحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.